edition of Brad's Red Web, or The Red Web with Brad West, and my co-stars Anastasia Anderson and Mr. Greg Barrow. Take it away, Greg.
Obviously, I'm from Dragon's Lair Comics and Fantasy, and I just really quickly want to say you can go to the website, www.dlayer.net/Austin, and find out about what we're doing this Halloween. We're actually doing a drive-by Halloween event, so you can just drive by and get some good stuff at the shopping center where Dragon's Lair is at. So lots of really cool stuff to talk about today. One of my favorite subjects, the Universal Monsters.
Hey.
The first one, of course, was the Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney, the Man of 1,000 Faces. And that was a silent film. And then the first of the talkies.
Well, tell us about how how they got into monsters in the first place. You were telling me it was very fascinating.
Yeah, well, it started out Universal Monsters. I can't remember the name. Anyways, the original Carl LeMay or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Carl.
He actually started Universal Pictures by he was showing movies at different places. Because they didn't really have theaters yet. He would just go set up somewhere and show silent films. And he got enough money from that he bought land out at in Hollywood area, one of the first people to do that, and started making studios and started making pictures. And so his, I want to say his nephew.
Right, he originally didn't want to do monsters.
Yeah, originally he didn't want to do monsters, even though Lon Chaney's monster films brought them money. Like he did The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he did
Jekyll and Hyde, right?
Or I don't think it was Jekyll and Hyde. I think it was the Phantom of the Opera.
Oh yes,
the Phantom of the Opera was especially really popular, and so they wanted to do these big spectacle pictures, but it was the 1920s, and of course there was the Great Depression. So they couldn't afford to do anything really super elaborate like they wanted. So what they did was horror films were a really easy way for them to make very popular movies that people enjoyed without spending like the Ben-Hur type of money.
Right.
So the first of those was Bram Stoker's Dracula. They had been working for over 10 years to bring that to the screen. But the stage play, the second stage play, I guess I should say, the one that was done for America, was super popular, and Bela Lugosi especially made that stage play so popular that they decided to do a movie version, and Bela Lugosi had to fight to get that role.
Yeah.
For that first
I believe it.
So real quick, I want to make sure that our audience at home understands what we're talking about when we're talking about Universal Monsters and what makes a Universal Monster. Obviously, monsters are pretty much a generic term for anything. The Universal Monsters, when you say that, is referring to the cache of monsters created in the early days of Universal Pictures. Yeah. And even though some of the monsters and characters are based on properties that are public domain, many of them have either specific elements or specific designs or even story parts that are unique to the Universal Monsters and therefore are copyrighted by Universal Studios. So for instance, while anybody can make a Dracula movie, you cannot make a Dracula movie based on the story of the original Dracula movie. You can make one based on the book, or you can make other movies with the character Dracula.
I mean, there's some similarities, but for the most part, they're very different, especially Bela Lugosi's portrayal.
Correct. And if you want a good, easy visual distinction, for kids who have seen the flat top Frankenstein versus older versions where it's just, a guy stitched together, that's where those images come from.
I mean, I think everybody can agree the Universal Monsters are very iconic. And
still today, some of the most recognized and rebooted properties in all of franchises in all of cinema.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you see a lot of them, you know what the visual difference is.
Yeah, as we go through, you're gonna catch a couple, and you're gonna go, oh, okay,
right.
And I think that the movie that, or the couple of movies that really cemented the Universal Monsters. I mean, Dracula was successful, Phantom of the Opera was successful, but I think that what really cemented the Universal Monsters was, of course, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein.
Yes.
Especially James Whale's directorial style for Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
I think that the Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein are so iconic that
and they changed the storylines up, and like you were saying, it's 20 in budget, so a lot of these creative decisions, as many things in cinema or art are, the restrictions of budget did lead to some creative workarounds, and that also audiences weren't as maybe they were as sophisticated, but producers didn't quite think along those lines, so a lot of the stuff was new material, and they kind of tempered it to a degree. You don't have as much of the really deep philosophical themes that Frankenstein was supposed to represent.
Right.
And as you do it in other retellings of it. But yeah, you're talking about who's the makeup artist again?
Jack Pierce.
Jack Pierce.
Jack Pierce was amazing.
Yeah, and he gives us the flat top Frankenstein and the beehive Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, and he did the Mummy. The Mummy makeup is just phenomenal, and I think Boris Karloff especially was suited for the amazing makeup that Jack Pierce created for these creatures. Mm-hmm. He was the main makeup effects artist at Universal, starting with Dracula, but he didn't do Bela Lugosi's makeup because Bela Lugosi was used to doing his own makeup, and he didn't want anyone.
Which was
as classically trained theater people were.
Yes. Yeah. Which is interesting because Greg and I were talking last night. We watched the original Dracula, and it's actually very notable that he to me anyway, he did a better job of his makeup than some of the other characters.
It's like he probably had more practice.
And I know because we've taken theater, we've taken theatrical studies, and the way that celluloid works, and I actually was surprised because it was the time when it was early enough that they were starting to figure out that film gray worked better than pancake white. Pancake white was used on the stage because of the way it reflected light.
Yes.
And made the visage more shapely and seen from a further distance. And they were still using that in movies because they didn't know any better until they started learning that the gray with the blue tinge showed up better on the film because of the silver that was used to develop it the way that the film was.
Nice.
And they started learning that the gray was different, and you can actually see a striking difference when they move over, because a lot of the characters on the black and white one were stupid white. Like Renfield was clownish white, and I could not stop looking at him. It's just something out of me. But you were talking about the Mummy. The Mummy's a really good one. Tell us more about that.
Well, I mean, the Mummy, obviously Boris Karloff again, just absolutely amazing actor, and he was very thin because he was actually very poor when these movies started, and so he was actually a starving artist in a lot of ways, and
he very much was.
He actually was missing teeth.
Yes, that was part of your talking
and that was first shown in Frankenstein. You can see part of his face is caved in, and that's because he took out his bridge, his dentures, so that he could suck in his cheek into that
pocket
and made him look even more cadaverous.
Yeah. The cool thing about, when we're talking about how Universal Monsters is a very specific set of monsters, this is the first one where that it's really unique to Universal. So the concept of a mummy obviously is public domain, and at the time the movies were being made,
King Tut's tomb.
King Tut's tomb was on tour.
It was huge.
And it was huge. So they made the Mummy movie, but the storyline was a new one.
Yeah.
The character of Imhotep. And we talk about remakes. Most people know the more modern Imhotep movie, but Imhotep is a Universal property in himself.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting because that's one of the first ones.
Yeah. And then of course you go into The Invisible Man with Claude Rains, which is absolutely phenomenal actor who did an amazing job. That's one of my favorites, is The Invisible Man.
And that's where we first get the whole bandage look, right? Or did they use that in the book?
I never read the book.
I don't remember the bandages from the book.
Okay, so
I remember.
Yeah,
I'm completely
in the book. I think he was they just embraced the invisible part. They didn't start doing things to visually distinct him, like putting clothes on him or putting bandages
because
on
Universal
him,
and that has to
until
do with,
much later.
Well, that had to do with the budget. Because it was harder to represent.
Much easier.
It was harder to represent somebody invisible on the show, and that gave them an excuse for having the actor, being able to see the actor emote physically with the bandages. That's why they created that, was so that you got that scary idea of him being invisible without them having to make him invisible. And that's why I say I love creative restraints because it
well,
gives people.
Also, I mean, it was amazing use of special effects back then. I mean, that's green screen, blue screen.
Mm-hmm.
That was an amazing use of it. I mean, because they painted in blue and he disappears on screen.
Right.
Because
Once
they
you
filmed
see the switch,
they filmed
you're like,
background and then they blocked it out and then they filmed him separately. So that you could see through him, and it was just absolutely amazing use of special effects.
And there was also a degree of puppetry in it. They used a lot of things to move things with strings and stuff, which I think was really cool.
So, I mean, they did a lot of things that just, absolutely, And then, of course, you get later on. And I really want to talk about Jack Pierce more. Jack Pierce, these movies wouldn't exist without Jack Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you watch the early ones, like from Frankenstein's monster all the way up through the 1940s, you can kind of see the amazing makeup effects that he did, and then they unceremoniously just let him go.
Yeah.
And they brought in this young guy who did everything with latex masks, where everything was just like pull-on latex masks, and you can tell.
Did he do the original Wolfman?
He did the original Wolfman. He actually did the Werewolf of London. He did the Invisible Man.
Yes.
He did.
He's the one who came up with the idea to do it in stages, the makeup.
Yeah.
To show the transformation. I mean, because obviously
and
he
did
CG.
do latex effects. Because like the Frankenstein's monster in the first film, he built that up every day. When they started, it was like, I want to say a 6-hour makeup job where he was building stuff up onto his head to make that flat top every day on the set. And
that
then
is brutal.
it was very brutal.
It's always fascinating.
It was actually Boris Karloff. It's said that Boris Karloff actually didn't take the makeup off at the end of the day and went home and slept in the makeup to try to save some of that, to preserve some of that.
That's really cool.
So to try to make the process go faster. But later on, because these movies got so popular, he actually had a latex flat top head part made for Boris and for the stuntman.
Okay.
And he actually commissioned that outside of Universal Pictures to make that. I mean, he sculpted it, but then he had it like cast elsewhere to do the foam latex.
Nice.
Okay.
So he was doing the foam latex, but the main reason why Universal said that they let him go is that he didn't use the foam latex. And he was like, he did. They just, a lot of speculation is about how they wanted someone younger in there.
See, this is where you can get the juicy drama.
Right?
On
the Universal one's been interesting because, especially learning about Millicent Patrick, I didn't realize there was so much drama.
Yeah, Millicent Patrick is another really amazing effects artist. She did the entire Creature of the Black Lagoon costume.
And just for those of you at home, talking about Universal monsters, the Wolfman, even though there were obviously werewolves in lore and everything else, all of the elements for the original Universal Wolfman were just made up for that.
Yeah.
So the story for the Wolfman, the Talbots, even though I see they use that name in a lot of stuff, the whole Talbot mythology behind Wolfman, that was an original Universal thing, but it was still based on a pre-existing thing. Creature from the Black Lagoon is really cool because it's the first one, at least that I was able to find in our research, that is a completely original monster based on African mythology, Amazon mythology. About half fish, half human people, but they just totally made that story and everything up, and that was like their first like super original. You cannot watch a Creature from Black Lagoon movie anywhere else. It's always some other thing because that's when they have full on rights to.
Yeah. Right, and it's like,
or the one movie where they've gotten away with it is where they didn't say it was a Creature of the Black Lagoon.
They were just like, look, guys,
and the Shape of Water is what we're talking about.
Shape of Water, yes. Yeah. It's a spiritual sequel. I've heard him say that before.
Yeah. So.
And it's like she has contributed to all of that image because it's like for people who hadn't caught on, it said the Universal monsters are separated into two types. You've got the ones who were deliberately coming from books, and then the ones that were completely original. And Millicent Patrick is the one who created the image. Yeah. And she didn't, it's like, and her life was incredible. This is a woman who was the first animator who was the first female animator from Disney, and it's like she's part of the reason that a lot of people wanted to. It's like they had a college pipeline that brought kids in. It's like she was one of the main workers of Fantasia. And for people who know about like pastel effects, like those beautiful magical effects in Fantasia, she didn't just like do it, she started that. It's like, so when they asked her to make a shift into special effects and into makeup artistry, it was a match made in heaven. All of her images are beautiful.
Yeah. And as we said, she created the entire Creature of the Black Lagoon from scratch. That's entirely her design.
Yeah.
And then
and she gets such a shaft at the end of her life.
Yeah. Talking about Creature of the Black Lagoon, didn't we find out its name? Didn't it have a name?
It has a real name.
It has a name in the story. They call it Ichthyo something. I thought we found it.
It's a scientific name.
I thought we found it. We found it.
It's a dumb nerdy science name.
You know what? We learned a lot. I just for the first time learned what I was like. We were talking about where the Roswell Gray aliens came from, and it was originally in a Ray Bradbury story, right? H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells. Yeah, they had a name. So. Other than Gilman, I know they called it Gilman in the movies, but yeah, I forgot what it was called. I'm sorry. That was my sidetrack. I apologize.
It's all good. So anyway, Universal Pictures really had an amazing staff of people that made these films just really awesome. But I think that
the
James inspired casting of Lon Chaney Jr. Because Lon Chaney Jr., his son, Lon Chaney's son,
Claude Rains.
Claude Rains, who amazing actor. Boris Karloff, they lucked out with Boris Karloff. He was absolutely amazing. And then Bela Lugosi.
So it's obviously our show is about superheroes, about exchanging comic books, and we will get to the superhero angle shortly, I promise. But I found it interesting. Yes, but I found it interesting when these characters first started coming to comic books. Boris Karloff was so associated with the horror monsters, even independently from the characters who portrayed in the movies. They had an entire series of comic books just called Boris Karloff Presents or something like that, and they were horror stories. But because of the marketing and the association with Boris Karloff and the monsters, they put his name on these horror stories to sell comic books.
Yeah.
Even though he wasn't necessarily, they weren't even characters he played. They just had new stories, and it's like the Boris Karloff comic book. I thought that was kind of
right, and he was like, it's like, and he was just like tight.
Yeah. Dell Comics actually had an entire run of adaptations of the Universal monsters in comics.
Was it like the first actual Universal adaptations licensed?
Yes.
Okay. So.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, they started making over into licensed characters. Lots of amazing actors are part of that history. And we talked about Jack Pierce too, right?
Yeah, we talked about Jack Pierce multiple times.
Oh, I thought. I
remember
you talking about James Whale. I thought you were talking about James Whale. I always get the two. Ever since we started doing the research,
James Whale was the director of Frankenstein.
The director, okay.
It's like
he's the director.
The only one we slightly grazed over was Lon Chaney, and that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lon Chaney, of course, is the man of 1,000 faces. Super famous for his makeup effects that he would do on himself.
Yes.
And of course, he was, as we said.
And when you talk about comic books, we talk about superheroes. He is a clear inspiration. Stanley has said he was a clear inspiration for the character Chameleon in Spider-Man comic books.
Okay.
He was actually that villain, who was the second supervillain that Spider-Man ever fought.
He was really
really early in the comic books. I think he was the second villain because he was in the second story in like the first issue or something. The first one being, of course, the Tinkerer, and he was in the first one. He was in the first story. He was in the first comic book. Not the first story. He was in Amazing Spider-Man #1. Yeah. But yeah, and he was inspired by
Lon Chaney.
Sorry.
But Jack Pierce and
Millicent
Patrick.
Both of them have documentaries and books that you can read on them, and I highly suggest it. They're very interesting.
Anna, you found something new on Millicent Patrick that you wanted to share with the audience.
Yes. There is a YouTuber who created a book called The Lady from the Black Lagoon that if you're into juicy Hollywood drama, that is apparently she covers all of it, and I'm so excited to read it. It's like I read one Halloweeny themed book every year. Last year it was about Vincent Price. This one will be Millicent Patrick.
Vincent Price is amazing.
Oh, his book.
Yes, so they're saying like Boris Karloff. Later on, Vincent Price was like same thing. They associated him so much with the horror genre that they had a Vincent Price.
I mean, even like the Thriller. That's why they got Vincent Price to be the Thriller video and the music.
Right, because after a while, like it's like these people become these big images in our zeitgeist. It just
watching
you
the
don't
documentary.
Think of anything separate.
Watching the documentary on the Dracula movie, Bela Lugosi's grandson, right? Is who was on the documentary? It was his son. Okay, his son.
Okay.
His son. He has one authentic Dracula cape left that is his most prized possession that was actually worn. The only other one that the family had, they buried him with it. And he's like, I don't know if that was what Dad would have wanted, but we just felt it was appropriate. So yeah, Bela Lugosi is so associated with Dracula that he was buried in one of these Screen War Dracula capes. So
right, and he's another good one. Like if you want to learn about somebody,
oh yeah, right.
He has
public knowledge. If you get your grave dug up, it's not our fault on Red Web, okay? Which is a disclaimer right here. So. Right,
he has a beautifully tragic life that would be worth. If you're gonna read up on anybody, he has an interesting one. It's like anybody who learned about Ed Wood has to learn about Bela Lugosi.
Well, I mean, if you watch the movie, you would see parts of towards the end of Bela Lugosi's life.
Yeah, because they're
really kind of sad because he got so stereotyped as Dracula that they wouldn't really pick him up for other films and stuff.
It was such a ride because there was some stuff in it that I was like, that can't be real, and then I looked it up and I'm like, oh.
Boris Karloff had a little bit more luck.
And the closest correlation today is, there's horror movies left and right, and people don't get stuck typecast in them like they did, but horror movies were very much what our superhero movies are right now.
Yes.
And you have the same image problem with a lot of actors signing on to play superheroes whose fear is that they are going to be stuck as that superhero for their entire career.
Yeah.
And that's because of dating back to the horror era.
Well, I mean, it's something that has been universally done in I didn't mean the pun. in Hollywood forever. I mean, Adam West, after he did Batman, he wasn't able to do much after that as far as, he had a hard time getting other roles. And
except for being the troubled guy.
Oh, when I talked to John Wesley Shipp at Greater Austin Comic Con, that was when he was at Greater Austin Comic Con. And it was interesting. I was asking him, how it felt to come back to the Flash, because he was like, part of him was kind of lamented being typecast as the Flash from the 90s, and it was hard for him to get other roles, But
he was father in Dawson's Creek. Though.
Yes, he was father in Dawson's Creek.
Hooray!
He was also in Teen Wolf and other things I've seen. He's done stuff, but he never really had anything to break out. And he's like, but now as an older actor, he's really grateful because the jokes on all the other actors who are forgotten or whatever, who are just like taking every role they can get. He's like, just coming to a convention is like it's a role, and I don't have to do much, but just shake hands and smile and stuff, and a lot of the it's really fun, especially as comic fans, because there was a time when actors and artists would actually begrudgingly go to comic book conventions because it's all they had left going for them, and now they like clamor for it because
right
it
now
keeps them relevant. They're excited for it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think, to keep it relevant, what would it have been like if like there was such a thing as like Comic Cons or horror cons or something?
There was.
Right, I'm like, there is.
But were they
every year.
were they like, I mean, back in the day, back in like the 40s?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Did Bela Lugosi they ever do things like that?
I want to say in the 60s they got really prevalent.
Dude, really? That's
in the 60s they were really prevalent. They had a lot of horror, especially Universal Monster conventions.
I would love to go and research some of those.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's like I said, I can never remember what it's called, but there's one that happens every year in Dallas, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah. San Antonio used to have a Monster Con, but it was like meh.
Yeah, it's like, and it's like, so for these last bits, we're definitely going to be dividing these up kind of weird because we were trying to figure out the best way to hone them down. We've got it's like, because we have to careen this back into superheroes, obviously, but we have the original comics that were literally just the adaptations of the movies and of the stories. We have
here we go.
It's like we have them in the superhero stuff and then the stuff that inspires superheroes. But what we're gonna start out with is just their comic adaptations to start.
Yeah. So the Dell Universal Monster comics were loose adaptations of the actual movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then
he had some amazing art too. Yeah. I know that
they're beautiful.
There was one poster from the original Dracula movie. Before we move into the comics, we have to talk about Spanish Dracula. But there was this one poster from the original Dracula movie that was so well designed, graphic design wise, that they used it in the comic book cover. And it was basically Dracula behind this web, and it had like all the female victims in it, like flies and stuff. Mm-hmm. It was actually super cool. And
sorry.
Right. We will be right back after these messages.
So I'll really quickly talk about Spanish Dracula.
I didn't think you were going to do
At the same time they were filming the Bela Lugosi Dracula, during the day, like from 8 o'clock in the morning until about 8 o'clock at night, they would film Dracula, and then 8 p.m. until 8 a.m. the Spanish crew would come on, and then they would film the Spanish version of Dracula.
Oh!
So basically, back in the day, when they were making the transition from silent films to talkie films, basically, they needed to justify the budget as much as possible and get as much of an audience as they can. And there was a huge clamoring for Spanish language films, because obviously when you do silent films, it's super easy to change that dialogue card to Spanish. Mm-hmm. So their idea was that they were going to, in fact, they filmed basically 3 versions at once. If you watch the original Dracula, we learned in the documentary, there are deliberate weird pauses. And there's a lot of spots where I'm like, wow, they're really, really doing this dramatic pause a lot. But actually it's intentional, not just to create suspense, but actually to help them to edit in the title cards for silent language. So it was released in a silent version.
Not everybody had the equipment to screen.
Because not everybody had the equipment to do it.
To do the talkies yet.
And so when they had their deals, their financial deals with the Spanish-speaking countries, and so they still had to provide movies, but they wanted to try out the Spanish.
Because they hadn't done dubbing yet.
And they hadn't learned how to dub, exactly. Or they hadn't
they hadn't gotten it down yet to dub in a good way.
In a good way. So they just had a whole new Spanish crew come in. And this is really interesting to me because there are apparently people who feel that the Spanish version of the Universal Dracula is actually in many ways superior.
Really?
Yeah, it's a little bit longer. It's actually slightly better acted in some places. And the thing that I found most fun is there was actually a little documentary with Carl Lemmy's granddaughter.
Yeah.
Carla.
Who's actually in the Dracula
yes.
film.
She has not only she is his grandniece, and she's named after him, but she has the first speaking words in any horror movie ever because for the first horror movie, not the first speaking movie, but first speaking horror movie. So she has the first lines in Dracula. But she was talking about how the crew would not only come in and just reuse the props and stuff, they would watch the dailies takes from the English crew
and say, "Oh, we can do that,"
and see what they could improve on. I haven't watched it all the way through, but I've seen some scenes where they do a side-by-side comparison. I'm like, wow, like the Spanish version actually does have like a lot more drama to it. It's actually kind of funny.
Yeah.
So, interesting. Oh my God.
And that's not to say anything against the English cast and crew, because I think that they did an amazing job.
Oh, yeah.
It's also really weird because, of course, it's taking place in Europe, and they have armadillos.
Oh, yes, the armadillos. They even mention the armadillos. It's
no.
Why are there armadillos in a castle in Transylvania?
I'm just imagining a little armadillo scuttling by.
There were
a family
of them. Oh, yeah.
I would die.
What's up with the armadillos, yo?
I would absolutely die. I would love that.
But I really loved the craftsmanship of the sets and the just everything they put into these movies. There's so much love put into these movies, and it's just it's so much fun. You know, I mean, even as an adult, I mean, I remember the first time I watched the Universal Monster film. My dad had a 8mm.
Oh yeah.
Reel-to-reel film camera that he would like, you know, do home movies and stuff. And so he actually, I can't remember if he rented or bought the Universal Monsters reel of I think it was Frankenstein. And we watched, I mean, it was for like a Halloween party that he did. He did Frankenstein, and I think he did Dracula as well. And we watched these on that. And so
you know what? You just reminded me of something, and this is really, really bizarre, and I don't know if anybody else in the whole wide world remembers this, but there was a time when VCRs were still like the highest tech that you could get.
So back in my day
when I was a kid, and for Christmas we got a set of VCR board games.
Yes.
VCR board games.
VCR board games. First off, I will tell you that I lament to this day that there's not a DVD version of VCR Clue.
Yes.
Because VCR
wait
Clue.
a minute.
VCR Clue was awesome.
VCR Clue is like the most amazing thing to play. But I digress. Secondly, I got a horse racing game where they like literally filmed random horse races and you pretended like you were going to the horse races. But the third one I had that I remember very clearly, it was Universal Monsters.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was a board game, and you were a monster hunter. And basically what it would do is you would randomly skip around on the VCR and stop, and it would stop on like these clips of monsters. And whoever could figure out what kind of monster it was first, vampire, werewolf, mummy, whatever, plays the card to capture the monster. But it was just nothing but clips. And some of them, they were just so funny and so cheesy. It's just like one of my favorite memories of. Okay, so anyway,
right,
this is a thing. If you can find it and edit it onto some DVD, so you don't have to rewind it, and it would probably be a hoot to have.
It's like those sort of things exist. Like I remember having a DVD game like that, but they're so few and far between because for some reason they were like, nobody's gonna like this. But
I still have those somewhere in storage. In fact, I have a copy of VCR Clue that I found at a thrift store. Unopened, but it's not VCR Clue. It's a Betamax tape.
Okay.
I need to figure out how to transfer it because it's never been played. The cards are still in the wrapper. It's brand new. I dreamt of somehow transferring it to digital one day.
I'm still like, oh my god, Betamax.
It's Betamax.
Bless.
That's gonna be hard.
But
bless.
it was $3. I'm like, okay.
It's the big thing is going to be to find the a Betamax.
Somebody to play transfer it.
Because that's what you really need to find is the Betamax VCR.
Yeah.
Because they have, like, I've got things that'll hook up to my VCR that I can take VCR to the computer.
But yeah,
right.
like the Universal Monsters hunting game was super fun when I was a kid. That's the first ones I remember.
And of course, Universal Monsters inspired so much. It was so popular that I mean, I don't think you would have the monster cereals without Universal Monsters. I don't think you'd have. One of my favorite things growing up was Spider-Man. Yeah, Count Chocula.
And Frankenberry. Does Frankenberry have a flat top? I never paid attention.
No, it's just kind of a bowl.
Now
I'm
like, I thought it was a bowl.
And it's got like
a
gauge on it.
Right.
You know, so it's very obviously different.
Okay, hold on, real quick. Greg, tell us why the makeup artist made Frankenstein's head top flat.
Because it's a box to hold the brain in.
Yes. Because he was inspired by like a box that you could open up and put a brain in.
It's sort of flat.
Like a brain jack in the box.
But
I love that. I love that
comic aspect of it. One of the things that really, I mean, like Marvel.
It's sort of flat.
It is.
Yeah, it's getting flatter.
It's getting flatter.
But he's got like a little steam thing on his side and stuff like that. But anyways,
they probably own it by now.
Yeah.
So.
Getting back to comics. So Marvel had Frankenstein's monster. DC had Frankenstein's monster, and a lot of them brought those different monsters into like Dracula. There was the Tomb of Dracula comic book.
So like the first one that we were able to find back in 1967 was Silver Surfer #7, where Silver Surfer, of all the characters of Marvel Comics, meets Frankenstein.
And you're just like, all right.
The most prevalent one was, of course, Giant Size Spider-Man #1, 1974, with Frankenstein's monster. That's a particularly cool one because you actually have Spider-Man on the slab getting his brain transfer with Frankenstein. So I love that one. That's super funny.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorites is inspired by the Wolfman, Mark of the Man-Wolf.
Man-Wolf.
They actually did a Power Records version of it where it was the comic, and then you would have a record in the back that was dramatized. And so we'd put the record on and we would read along while, you know.
And it's interesting because, like we talked about, Universal Monsters, of course, are a licensed copyright of Universal Studios. So they were trying to copy them without straight up ripping them off. So the Man-Wolf instead of the Wolf-Man, that's the first part of it. And of course, he's J. Jonah Jameson's son's the astronaut. If you watch Spider-Man 2, you saw him in Spider-Man 2. He was engaged to Mary Jane. But he was an astronaut who, rather than getting bitten by a wolf, he found it was like a magic moon rock.
Yeah.
The moon rock turned him into a wolf.
And it grafted itself to his skin.
Yes. So he was kind of
a necklace and
so he was kind of a sci-fi werewolf, just like Morbius was a kind of a sci-fi vampire.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's a really fun one.
Right. And if you ever want to follow the drama of like why any of this happens, because especially with horror stuff, it comes in phases.
Yeah.
So every couple of years, just out of nowhere, a solid year, you're going to have every single person fight this specific monster for whatever reason. And it either comes down to their trademarks and copyrights were about to expire, or someone wanted to use them because they're such a part of our culture, but they don't want to use the specific ones. Because it's like, since a lot of them are based off of books that are public domain, you can have a Dracula, but not Universal Studios Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah. Well, the Bram Stoker's one was actually, and that's the reason they had to put Bram Stoker. That one wasn't Universal. The Francis Ford Coppola one was, that's why they called it Bram Stoker's Dracula, to differentiate it from Dracula. And they attempted to make it a period piece and make it more in tune with the original book, which they failed.
Right. It's like,
not really. I read the book. This is always a mistake. I highly suggest you not do this.
I read the book when I was in high school.
Just before I went to see Bram Stoker's Dracula.
That's like reading a Stephen King book right before you watch the movie.
Yeah, I'm getting a naughty over on the side there.
It is destined to make you miserable.
Yes, don't do that.
Honestly, I would have loved Dracula if they had said Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
Yeah.
It's
but
like,
because they put that Bram Stoker name on there,
you got all excited.
I had a expectation
of Bram Stoker
of it at least,
and it wasn't
paying
really
tribute to Bram Stoker.
Yeah, and it wasn't really Bram Stoker Dracula.
No,
like I said,
it wasn't at all. The only thing I can say about it is that it's the only movie that I can think of Dracula that actually has the Texan. The Texan was actually in the book, but otherwise, it was over-sexualized.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Well, I was talking to another friend of mine earlier today, getting some more information. You probably see my friend Frank. He's a big cinephile too, and it's like, what are y'all doing the show on tonight? And we were talking about the Mummy, the original Mummy, and how the original story was unique to it, and it had this story. It was actually where the trope of the reincarnated dead love came from, and that wasn't in the Dracula book. But in Bram Stoker's Dracula, quote unquote, by Francis Ford Coppola, they literally just ripped that right off of the original Mummy.
Yeah.
That whole thing with her being the reincarnation of his love who killed herself or whatever.
So the second,
and the whole Francis Ford
Coppola.
Well, I always call it Francis Ford Coppola Dracula.
Now the two new Mummy movies actually kind of pulled really closely and heavily from the original.
Did they?
So the Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, which I always call it that because it's not Bram Stoker.
It's not Francis Ford Dracula.
Bram Stoker's book, I mean, was so suspenseful.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, there were moments I was reading the book and I was literally on the edge of my seat going, oh my God, especially like when they're going through the cities.
That was your favorite part.
Trying to figure out where all these coffins were, and they had to do it before the sunset.
Yeah.
And they've got all the coffins except for the last one.
Yeah.
And they haven't found Dracula yet. And they're like, the sun is going down and there's so much suspense and like
Well, the most suspenseful part for me was
Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
Doesn't have that.
It's like not even 30 seconds in the film. Yeah. It's like just kind of glossed over.
The boat. That was the most suspenseful part to me, was the voyage over, and while Dracula is slowly, and everybody starts to become mysteriously ill one by one, and they start dying. It starts off with them finding the rats and then building up, and that was a super suspenseful part. That really needs to be more in the movie.
Right, and for comics, it's like, for people who are like, hey, why do they want this? That's why they liked using Dracula so often, because especially when you read the books, he's such an unstoppable force that it's terrifying to think of, because regular people don't know how to stop it, and for a lot of us, these superheroes are mostly regular people, especially in Marvel, so they have to navigate this, and usually once you change, it's over.
Well, it's like the Mummy. The original Mummy was very powerful sorcerer when he came back, and he was an unstoppable force. And it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I was reminded of the ending. Apparently, the real cool catch of the original ending of the movie is that the princess is the one who kills him. It ends when she has all of her memories of her reincarnated life come back, and she remembers her lover as he was before he was a monster. So when she recognizes him and sees what he's become, when she sees what he's become, she rejects him and prays to the goddess Isis for the power to destroy him. And she's actually the one who saves herself.
I'm still like, so does this mean that the 90s Mummies movies are a more accurate remake than I thought?
They did have a lot of it. They picked a lot of it up.
They kind of mixed it together.
But they made it more of an action.
They made it more of an action film, just like
Van Helsing.
Brendan Fraser was amazing in that. Yes. I have to say that. I mean, it was.
And Oded Farr. We love Oded Farr.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, he was
right.
Amazing. He needs
most
to be more
important.
He needs to be a lot of things.
He should have. I'm still like he should have been Doctor Strange.
I know.
I hold by it.
Yeah.
It's like, stop putting Benedict Cumberbatch in things, please.
I know.
Nothing against Benedict Cumberbatch.
He's a fine. Yeah. I hear he's a chill dude.
But you can get fatigued. You can get fatigued by anybody.
That casting would have been so good.
But
also,
so keeping it on with the superheroes, Tomb of Dracula was a very, very popular, long-running Marvel comic, and
which also was the introduction of Blade.
It was the introduction of Blade. So if you really want to go into your history and praise the monsters, that's a really good one. Another really famous one, and it's an alternate world, but it's had adaptations, was Red Rain, which is Batman versus Dracula.
Yes.
They even made a loosely animated film based on it.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. Yes.
Which is kind of something that you would never, ever want to miss. Another really good one that my husband loves is the and Frank was talking to me about it earlier today because we had looked it up, was the first time that the X-Men versus Dracula. Now this is a really interesting thing. Dracula shows up sporadically in Marvel Comics outside of his own title.
Yeah.
However,
last time I think was actually in the Black Cat comic series that's going on right now.
Yeah.
I want to say he showed up in like the first or second issue.
But apparently, he has throughout the years of Marvel been most closely associated as a villain of the X-Men. The majority of his appearances outside of his little old title has been as a nemesis of the X-Men. In fact, the one page that we found that I really just love, it's basically Kitty Pryde is fighting Dracula, and of course she's Jewish, so they assume that the cross is what Dracula's afraid of. And it's not the cross until he comes to her and she's got the Star of David, and her faith is in the Star of David.
Right, the point is the faith.
So she uses the Star of David. Well, then Wolverine picks up the cross, and it does nothing for him because, he's Wolverine.
Right, he has no faith.
And right, but then, of course, Nightcrawler, who is in seminary and a devout Catholic, he picks it up, and he kicks Dracula's ass with it.
He doesn't just pick up the cross, he picks up two sticks and makes a cross.
Oh, he picks up two sticks and makes a cross.
Yeah. That's even more cool.
Yeah, so
that's beautiful. That's badass.
So yeah, Dracula's actually pretty cool. In fact, in more recent years, I think in the 2010s,
I'm still like, Nightcrawler's so freaking underrated.
After all of the mutants lost their powers because of Scarlet Witch, after Scarlet Witch took away a bunch of his powers, Jubilee actually ended up becoming a vampire.
Yeah.
That would be neat.
Through one of Dracula's sons, who they had to help keep from defeating Dracula. I don't know how to read it, but
now I'm like,
I just remember
kind of visually.
I just remember Vampire Jubilee was a thing for years.
Yeah. And then also one of my favorite characters inspired by the Universal Monsters in the Marvel Universe is Werewolf by Night.
Werewolf by Night. We both love Werewolf by Night.
Of course, and that's where Moon Knight first.
And that's where Moon Knight first comes out. And there's rumors that they've cast Jason Isaac as Moon Knight, and I'm so excited because since Daredevil Netflix episode 1, I'm like, this needs Moon Knight. And I've told my friends about Moon Knight, and I try to explain why he's so cool. And then, like, I've talked about Moon Knight so much that my friends, as soon as that thing came up today, they're like tagging me in it. I've got like 3 people tagging me in it, and they're like, I was like, do I really talk about Moon Knight that much? But yes, I really love this character.
And
she makes Wolverine a vampire?
Does she?
But anyway, so the Werewolf by Night, really, really good book. I highly suggest you picking it up. I know that they made an omnibus with the entire series, which was a great. I had a really fun time reading that.
The cool thing about Werewolf by
Night,
Night,
they just released this last week. They released the first issue of a brand new Werewolf by Night.
Oh, sweet!
Which he is. He's American Indian.
Oh, a new one, a new actual
totally
werewolf.
New Werewolf by Night.
So the original Werewolf by Night, and this is really, I love the humor behind his name. His name is Jack Russell. Yes, Jack Russell, like the terrier. But
that's fine.
But he finds out that's not his true name, that he's been adopted, that he's actually descended from the Talbots, and that goes to Universal Monsters because the Lawrence Talbot is the werewolf bloodline in there. So even though he doesn't get his, I don't even get. But basically, yeah, he's a Talbot too. So that ties superheroes into Universal Monsters. Another one that I really like is Encanto, the Living Mummy. Oh, make sure he doesn't trip on the wires. Sorry, my pug is going through our
little
set.
Baby, sir. Don't do this, man.
So
not today.
Encanto, the Living Mummy was a really cool one because they actually took the concept of the mummy, but to make him more heroic, instead of him being just a wizard or a royalty, he was a revolutionary who was trying to free the Egyptian slaves and got cursed. And so he was basically heroic already beforehand. So then when he endured the curse and got the powers, he continued to fight on the side of good. So that's another Universal-inspired superhero.
Yeah.
And it even gets to the point where you have a Legion of Monsters comic book. It starts off with Ghost Rider and some other characters. But my favorite culmination of Universal Monsters is everybody knows the original Howling Commandos. That was just the name of Nick Fury's team in the War II.
Generic brand team.
They used them in the Captain America movie, the Howling Commandos, Dum Dum Dugan, and those characters. Well, in the 2000s, late 2000s to 2010, Nick Fury creates a supernatural task force on S.H.I.E.L.D. and calls it the Howling Commandos, very tongue-in-cheek, because it is composed of the monsters. Yeah. And it has Werewolf by Night and Encanto and Blade sometimes. Yeah, it was actually kind of cool. They even introduced another werewolf that I like called Warwolf. Yeah. It was interesting because his powers were based on the phases of the planet Mars instead of the moon.
Oh, that's a joy.
It was a unique. Yeah, it was a cool thing. He would get more powerful depending on how close Mars was. Yeah. And stuff. So those were some fun ones. And here's one that Greg loves this story. Like we said before, Creature from the Black Lagoon was not a pre-existing property that they transferred over, but rather a completely new thing.
That they just made up, yep.
When transferring him into the comics, take him away, Greg.
So, I can't remember his name.
Mark Wolfman?
No, not Mark Wolfman. There was a artist who designed a new character and tried to sell them to Marvel and DC at the same time. And and both of them wanted it, but Marvel got to him first. So he sold it to Marvel, and DC said, well, we want him too. And so he created another version called Devilfish for DC. And yeah, so
I'm tempted. It's like I'm telling you, learning about like copyrights and stuff is such a gas, especially when it comes to like pop culture things.
And I don't think it's Mangog. What was the name of the
Amphibian?
Amphibian?
Oh yes, that indescribable squiggle at the bottom. Okay. It's like, or I saw Man.
Yeah,
and then it just kind of went, and I'm like, what?
Mark Wolfman, Tony Isabella, Dave Cockrum.
Dave Cockrum was the one who did it.
You did it? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was Dave Cockrum.
He first appeared in Legions of Monsters by Mark Wolfman. So
it's like, so Amphibian and Devilfish, just same thing?
They're the same thing. What's really interesting about
Totally
Devilfish
yeah.
is that Devilfish is a different look, and he's actually colored differently to distinguish him from Manthidian. However, whoever did the colors on the cover didn't get the memo. So in the first appearance of Devilfish, on the cover, he's green like the creature from the Black Lagoon, but in the interiors, he's like orange and yellow colors. Like he's more koi goldfish colors.
Yeah.
So
that's so freaking funny. I love it.
So the thing about the Universal monsters is that they're constantly getting renewed. They're constantly being retooled.
And like Anna said, a lot of it has to do with them wanting to maintain their copyrights.
That's part of it. But I think that a lot of it is also the joy of these monsters and people wanting to put their own touch on it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we talked about Brendan Fraser in that era of the Universal monsters with, of course, with the Mummy films, and then with
Mummy, Van Helsing.
Van Helsing, and take note, if you watch Van Helsing, that Frankenstein has a flat top head.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's unique. It's important to know that that's a universal monster. That's how you know it's universal, because it's got the flat head.
Yes. For people who know about the Dark Universe right now, this was their last attempt before we got to this failed attempt.
They had a pretty good Wolfman with Benicio del Toro.
That was the Mummy phase.
Yes.
The last phase.
Yeah, that was the last phase.
That's
what I'm saying. Before we move on to the next phase, they had that one. Yeah.
They did a much better job in the 90s action the 90s action phase.
And one of my favorite directors actually directed that.
Yeah, and of course Sir Anthony Hopkins too.
I still need to watch that version, the Benicio del Toro.
Take it.
Because I hear it's fantastic.
It's good. And the only drawback is that they got over ambitious, and it's my same thing with anything that's highly special effects. Is I
wish I could catch like that.
They kind of depended a little bit more on the CGI than I would have liked, because
which is weird because Benicio del Toro is already like 8% Wolfman anyway.
But you can't run from rooftop to rooftop.
I know, but it was still good. It was still cool. It's one of those things that I would love to go back in time and show it to the audiences of the 40s and see how they react.
Oh my God, they would lose their mind.
I know.
And
they thought the original Wolfman was scary.
Oh.
But yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
That was the 90s, 2000s-ish era.
And
we've got the Dark Universe.
Now.
And I'm gonna say
the Dark Universe,
I watched the Luke Evans
Dracula Unchained or Dracula Unbound?
Untold.
Okay.
It's Dracula Untold, The Mummy, and consarn it.
Well,
the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man that just came out.
Oh, the new Invisible Man. I haven't seen that one.
Invisible Man.
I recommend it. It's actually really good.
I'm
very happy to hear that.
I was watching the previews and I was reading an article about it, and it's something that they made it topical.
It was a surprise.
Yeah. They made it topical. They changed it to more of a post-traumatic and a stalker type thing.
It's a social commentary.
It's more social commentary.
Which I think that's probably why that worked where the other ones didn't, because it's to put the drama lightly, there was drama with the Mummy, and that's why it tanked.
Well, Greg and I have a theory about that.
It's
no theory. I mean, Tom Cruise took
it was Tom Cruise.
It was Tom Cruise.
Short answer, it was Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise took it over.
His ego.
But for a lot of it, what ended up happening, because it's we had the 90s action phase, and then I think at the tail end we had League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And it just killed
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was not Universal, was it?
It wasn't, but the vibe.
The vibe was.
It's they were trying to
embrace the vibe. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was very much influenced by the Universal monster films.
Yeah, they were trying to
cash
in on that vibe.
For those of you who have not seen the movie or read the book, the idea was, what if we had this Victorian Avengers made up of classic literary characters? So it's kind of very much Thor gets his own movie, Captain America gets his own movie, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
Well, what if the Invisible Man had his own movie, and the Dracula, Mina Harker had her own movie, whatever, and then they combine them all together for a special team made up of these two. It's really cool, because it had Jekyll and Hyde on it. It had Alan Quartermain. It bombed as a movie, but it was actually a good movie. I enjoyed it.
It destroyed Sean Connery's career.
It did.
He refuses to do
it. You know the story? You know why he took that movie, right?
Why?
Okay, so hold on. This is a fun little background. Sean Connery was offered the role of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, and he turned it down because he did not understand the script. He didn't think it was going to be that big.
Right, yeah.
Then he turned down the role as Magneto in X-Men. I kid you not. Because he didn't understand and didn't know how big it was going to be. But both Lord of the Rings and X-Men did so well that when he got offered the role for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, he jumped on it. He's like, I don't want to miss out again. And it was exactly what he feared by turning down the other two. So I feel bad for Sean Connery, but that's why he took it, is because he already passed up the other two.
Right. Well, the thing is that, like, I think that his role in the first Highlander, he did such a great job, and it was such a wonderful movie that, you know, when he did the second Highlander film, it was such an abomination.
Yeah.
And a stab in the back of everything that the first movie stood for. Right. He was very cautious after that, because it was like, you know, he was like, he didn't even read the script for Highlander 2. He's like, oh, I had a great time on Highlander 1. Sure. You know, I'll do that. And then he goes in, and then it's like, wait a minute, this is nothing like, you know. So,
right. And it's and it's like with the Dark Universe. We almost lost
Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins almost stopped doing movies entirely because he had such a horrible time on a couple of films.
Yeah. It's like, and well, for the Dark Universe, part of the reason it did not do as good is it's trying to cash in on the excitement that we had when we went through the 90s action movies. Yeah. Even though, you know, we didn't think it was part of a collective universe or anything. We were just like, the Mummy was cool.
Yeah.
I loved the Mummy movies.
And it's interesting because when they had the whole idea came out of the, you know, Dark Universe with the Universal Monsters crossing over.
Everyone in their mother was the shared universe.
And they're like, oh, you're trying to copy the Marvel shared universe thing. Well,
technically they did it first.
Technically they did it first. Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to the old like 1930s and 1940s Universal Monster films, I mean, they were always crossing over with each other.
I mean, Abbott and Costello were the ancient Coulson of the Universal Monsters.
Right? It's like, but even still, like, I think, yeah, it was that initial bad timing, and then it's also like they're trying to do sort of a one-for-one between all of these old, horror action movies and this.
Yeah.
And that's why Invisible Man was such a shock to everybody, because that one ended up being such a refreshing difference compared to the Mummy. The Mummy with Tom Cruise, which became a big old action movie.
Well, it wasn't, because it wasn't meant to be an action movie. It was a
big budget action movie.
They wanted to go back to their horror roots.
Yeah.
And of course, Tom Cruise derailed that. But they also pulled a Justice League. They went in reverse, and they tried to put too much in at the same time. Because Russell Crowe's Dr. Jekyll, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was something that just didn't. It was.
They were just like, "Hey guys," and we're like, "Wait."
By the way, it's also a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie.
Yes, even though
talking about Universal Monsters influence, kind of like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. If you've ever seen Penny Dreadful, that's a really good. That's a much better way of telling. It's sort of like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, except it's only the horror icons. And it was really good. And after the last season, it cliffhangered with the introduction of Dr. Jekyll. And I'm like, damn it. Now there's no payoff for this. We got Dr. Jekyll over here now, and he's Dr. Frankenstein's contemporary. And I'm like,
right?
I can't wait to see this. And it's like, fudge.
And it's it's like, yes, they use the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde elements for stuff. Like when our old literary episode where we talked about tropes like that, of course they do stuff like that.
Well, yeah, but it's very much obviously Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah. It's like, but it's like I always feel like the actual Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story gets so underused that it's like, no, it's like I don't want the Ninja Turtles turning into them. I don't want another allegory from a pop culture thing. I want you to try again.
Speaking of Ninja Turtles, when I was a kid, there was actually a Halloween release of the Ninja Turtle toys that were licensed by Universal Monsters.
Yes.
There was a mummy, Donatello, and a vampire Raphael, and
they are
a werewolf. No, Raphael was the werewolf. But anyway, they have the mummy, the vampire, the werewolf, and
Universal Monsters. Really awesome. Highly suggest checking them out and checking out. You can find out books and documentaries on Jack Pierce and Millicent
Patrick. Yes.
If you really want to read some fun comics, Legion of Monsters in Marvel is great, especially Mrs. Deadpool and the Legion of Monsters. If you read that, that's super fun.
Right. It's like that
everybody
Batman
have a
vs.
happy
Dracula
Halloween.
trilogy.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for joining us on the web. Have a happy Halloween. And make sure you check us out every Tuesday at 7:30. And also go to the YouTube page for Pedulaz Media. Like, subscribe, and comment. And we'll see you next time.